When betrayal disguises itself as protection, a horse becomes the only ally of a young woman in her quest for survival, challenging even the strongest family bonds. Dawn in Hope Valley brought with it the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, escaping through the windows of modest houses with colorful walls. The bell of the main church announced the new day, while residents began their routines, greeting each other with familiar smiles. In that corner of Virginia, time seemed to follow another pace, slower and more measured, like the tranquil waters of Stone River that cut through the town. At the imposing Smith Ranch, situated on the hill that dominated the town's landscape, the day began differently. The colonial-style mansion, with its meticulously maintained gardens, hid behind its robust walls silences that weighed like lead. Sophie Smith, a 5-year-old girl with honey-colored eyes and golden curls, observed the world through her bedroom window. Seated in her wheelchair, she had a curious and intelligent gaze that contrasted with the fragility of her body. Her small hands held a pencil drawing, a brown horse with a thick mane galloping freely through the fields. "Good morning, my flower." The voice of Connie, the housekeeper who had cared for Sophie since birth, broke the silence of the room. "Did you sleep well?" Sophie nodded with a small smile, but her eyes reflected a longing that words couldn't express. "Today makes 6 months," whispered the girl, looking at the portrait on her dresser, where her mother Ellen smiled with the same honey-colored eyes. 6 months since Mum went away. Connie swallowed hard, approaching to adjust the girl's curls. "Your father is already having breakfast. Shall we go down?" In the dining room, Richard Smith was browsing the newspaper with an austere expression. Tall, with graying hair and features marked by time, he was the portrait of a successful man. Owner of the largest lands in the region and an agribusiness empire, his name was synonymous with respect and, for some, fear. "Good morning, Daddy." Sophie's timid voice echoed through the room when Connie pushed her chair to the table. Richard lowered the newspaper for a moment, his cold blue eyes meeting his daughter's. "Good morning," he answered dryly, returning his attention to reading. That coldness wasn't new. Since Ellen's disappearance, Richard had transformed. The man who before, even with his reserved nature, showed affection for his daughter, now seemed to see her as a burden, something that constantly reminded him of Ellen and secrets he preferred to keep buried. "Jack asked me to let you know that Thunder is restless today," commented Connie, serving coffee. "Said he wouldn't eat." At the mention of the horse's name, Sophie's eyes lit up. "Can I go see him, Daddy? Please?" Richard folded the newspaper with an impatient sigh. "I don't have time for this today, Sophie. I have important meetings in town." "I can take her, Mr. Smith," offered Connie, exchanging a meaningful look with the girl. "Do as you wish," he answered, standing up. "Just make sure she's ready by 3 o'clock. I'll take her to the doctor." When Richard left the room, the atmosphere seemed to lighten. Sophie turned to Connie, her eyes now animated. "Do you think Thunder is missing Mom too?" Connie smiled tenderly. "Maybe, my angel. That horse was always very attached to Ms. Ellen." In truth, Thunder was more than a simple animal for the Smith family. The majestic brown horse had been a gift from Richard to Ellen when they married, and over the years became an inseparable part of the family. Ellen spent hours caring for him, and when Sophie was born with the disability that prevented her from walking, it was by Thunder's side that the girl found consolation, as if the animal understood her frustration. After breakfast, Connie took Sophie to the stable where the imposing horse waited. Seeing the girl, Thunder approached the fence, lowering his head as if in a bow. Sophie extended her hand, gently caressing his mane. "He seems sad," she observed, noticing the melancholic look of the animal. Jack, the ranch foreman, a simple man with calloused hands and a generous heart, approached. "Animals can sense things, little Sophie. They know when something isn't right." The foreman's words echoed in the child's mind. Indeed, nothing had been right since her mother disappeared. Her father's explanations never made sense. "She needed to take a long trip," or "she needs time alone," were empty phrases that didn't fill the void left by Ellen. The day continued with Sophie spending the morning in the stable, telling secrets to Thunder as if the horse could understand and keep her confidences. Sometimes she was sure he understood, especially when he lowered his great head and stared at her with those deep, wise eyes. When the ranch clock struck 3, Richard appeared at the stable. His black Mercedes-Benz contrasted with the simplicity of rural life, just as his cold expression clashed with the welcoming environment Sophie had created there. "It's time," he announced without any emotion. In his voice, "We're going to the doctor." Sophie said goodbye to Thunder with a final caress, not knowing that that tranquil morning in the stable would be the last happy memory before her life changed forever. The storm forming on the horizon wasn't just rain, but secrets about to come to light, altering the fate of everyone in Hope Valley. The Mercedes-Benz glided smoothly along the dirt road that snaked through the hills of Hope Valley. Inside the car, silence weighed heavily. Sophie observed the familiar landscape through the window, feeling a growing uneasiness. Something in her father's behavior was different that day. A strange gleam in his eyes, a tension in his hands that gripped the steering wheel with unnecessary force. "Daddy, this isn't the way to town," Sophie commented timidly, recognizing the fork that led to Stone River. Richard kept his eyes fixed on the road. "We need to make a stop first." The short answer didn't satisfy the girl's curiosity, but she knew that insisting would be futile. Her father had become a man of few words in recent months, as if each sentence uttered was a painful effort. The car slowed down as it approached a small wooden pier on the banks of Stone River. That day, the river didn't live up to its usual name of calm waters. Recent rains had raised its level, transforming the current into something impetuous and threatening. "We're here," announced Richard, turning off the engine. Sophie looked around, confused. "But there's no doctor here, Daddy." "Change of plans," he responded dryly, getting out of the car. With mechanical movements, Richard removed the wheelchair from the trunk and opened it beside the car. His gestures were calculated, devoid of the tenderness that once existed. When he positioned Sophie in the chair, he avoided looking directly at her, as if he feared his eyes would reveal his true intentions. "We're going for a boat ride," said, pushing the chair along the wooden pier that creaked under the weight. A small boat swayed, tied to the end of the pier. Sophie felt a shiver run down her spine. The boat seemed too fragile for the turbulent waters, and something in her, father's expression, triggered an alarm in her childish heart. "I don't want to go, Daddy," she protested, clinging to the arms of the chair. "The water is too rough." Richard ignored his daughter's protests. With firm movements, he lifted her from the chair and placed her in the boat, which dangerously oscillated. The wheelchair was abandoned on the pier, like a symbol of the life being left behind. "Sit still," he ordered, untying the rope that held the boat. At the Smith Ranch, Connie was tidying Sophie's room with a strange feeling in her chest. Something wasn't right. Richard had mentioned a doctor's appointment, but when the housekeeper called Dr. Martin to confirm the time, she discovered there was no appointment scheduled. Worried, she looked for Jack, finding him in the stables, where he was taking care of Thunder. The horse was restless, whinnying loudly when she approached. "Jack, I'm worried," confessed Connie. "Mr. Smith took little Sophie, said they were going to the doctor, but there was no appointment scheduled." Jack frowned. "That is strange. Actually, since morning I've had a bad feeling. Thunder is more agitated than I've ever seen." As if to confirm the foreman's words, the horse whinnied again, stamping his hooves on the ground forcefully. "He's been like this since Mr. Smith left with the girl," explained Jack. "It's as if he senses something." Connie felt her heart tighten. "Do you think—" Before she could complete the sentence, Thunder emitted an even louder whinny and, in a sudden movement, pushed the stable gate with such force that the hinges gave way. Before Jack could react, the horse bolted outside, galloping toward the road that led to Stone River. "My God!" exclaimed Connie, bringing her hands to her face. "He's never done that before." Jack didn't waste time. "I'm going after him. Something. Here's wrong, very wrong. Call the police, Connie." Meanwhile, the boat with Richard and Sophie had already reached the middle of the river. The turbulent waters rocked the small vessel, making the girl cling to the edges in fear. Her father rowed with determination, moving farther and farther from shore. "Why are we here, Daddy?" asked Sophie, trying to control the tremor in her voice. Richard suddenly stopped rowing. For the first time that day, he looked directly at his daughter. His eyes were empty, as if the soul that once dwelled there had departed long ago. "Your mother didn't go away, Sophie," he finally said, with a voice that didn't seem his own. "She discovered something she shouldn't have and threatened to report me. I couldn't allow it." The words fell upon the girl like stones. "What are you saying, Daddy?" "Your mother's fortune. All the money she inherited from her parents. I needed that money to save my business, but she refused when she discovered my debts. And then she discovered more things I had done." Richard now spoke as if in a trance. "She left everything to you in a will. You're the sole heir, Sophie. As long as you live, I can't touch that money." The horror of understanding began to form in Sophie's mind. Tears blurred her vision as the terrible truth revealed itself. "What did you do to Mum?" she asked in a thread of voice. Richard didn't answer. Instead, he stood up in the boat, making it rock dangerously. "Do you know why I chose this place, Sophie? Because no one will suspect. A tragedy. Father and daughter on a boat ride when a sudden storm capsized the vessel. The child's body never found, carried away by the current. A sad story that will soon be forgotten." Sophie felt panic dominate her body. She looked around desperate, but there was only water on all sides. Water and the threatening figure of her father, who now leaned over her with a dark determination. It was at this moment, when all seemed lost, that a powerful whinny cut through the air. On the riverbank, imposing like a mythological figure, here stood Thunder. The horse observed the scene with an almost human intensity, as if comprehending the gravity of the situation. Before Richard could react, Thunder plunged into the turbulent waters. His powerful body cut through the current with surprising strength, swimming directly toward the boat. The sight of the horse momentarily paralyzed Richard, enough time for Sophie, in an act of desperation, to throw herself in the opposite direction, unbalancing the boat which capsized in the violent waters. Sophie's scream was muffled by the water that invaded her lungs. Unable to swim, she felt her body being dragged by the current. Darkness began to envelop her when something solid touched her arm. Thunder had reached the girl and, with surprising gentleness, grabbed her blouse with his teeth, keeping her above the surface. On the shore, a man watched the scene in disbelief. It was Jack, who had followed Thunder to the river. Without hesitation, he plunged into the waters to help with the rescue, while in the middle of the river, Richard fought against the current, his face a mask of fury and despair as he watched. His plans crumble before his eyes. Rain began to fall when Jack, with Thunder's help, managed to bring Sophie to the riverbank. The girl trembled, soaked and in a state of shock, her eyes still wide with the terror she had just experienced. The foreman wrapped her in his worn jacket, trying to protect her from the cold wind that blew. "Everything's going to be all right, little one," murmured Jack, holding her firmly. "You're safe now." Thunder remained beside them, his breathing heavy from the effort, but his attentive eyes not leaving the girl for a second. It was as if the animal understood the gravity of what had just happened and assumed the role of guardian. Jack looked at the river, where Richard was still struggling against the current. For a moment he considered going back to help him, but then he looked at Sophie, at her small trembling body and the fear in her eyes. The decision was made. The child's safety came first. "Let's go to my house," he said, mounting Thunder with Sophie safe in his arms. "You'll be protected there." The horse seemed to understand the urgency of the situation and galloped along the dirt road, moving away from the river with determination. The rain intensified, washing away the traces of the tragedy that almost materialized, while on the distant shore, the solitary figure of Richard finally reached firm ground, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and despair as he watched his daughter disappear in the distance. Jack's house was on the edge of the Smith property, a simple construction of stone and wood, surrounded by a small, well-tended garden. It was a modest place but welcoming, reflecting the personality of its owner. Mary, Jack's younger sister, was at the door, her face expressing concern when she saw her brother return with an unknown child in his arms. "My God, Jack, what happened?" she asked, running to help. "I'll explain later. Now we need to dry and warm this child." Mary didn't ask any more questions. With the efficiency of someone accustomed to emergency situations, she prepared a hot bath and set aside dry clothes, some old pieces she kept from her childhood. While Sophie was being cared for by Mary, Jack went out to accommodate Thunder in the small stable behind the house. The horse was still agitated, whinnied softly when Jack approached to remove the improvised saddle. "You saved her life today," said the foreman, stroking the animal's neck. "I've never seen anything like it in my entire life." Inside the house, Sophie, now clean and dressed in clothes that were a bit too big for her small body, sat wrapped in a blanket before the fireplace. Her eyes, once vibrant and curious, now seemed distant, lost in thoughts that no 5-year-old child should have. "Here, dear, drink this." Mary offered a mug of hot chocolate, sitting next to the girl. "It will help warm you up." Sophie accepted the drink with trembling hands, but didn't speak. The shock of what had happened still kept her silent, as if the words had been washed away by the river current. Jack entered, exchanging a worried look with his sister. "How is she?" "Physically, she seems fine, just some scratches, but—" Mary hesitated, lowering her voice. "She still hasn't said a word." The foreman knelt before Sophie, his gentle eyes meeting the girl's. "Oh, you're safe here, little one. No one is going to hurt you." It was as if a dam broke. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, and on impulse she threw herself into Jack's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The man embraced her tenderly, letting her release. All the accumulated pain and fear. He wanted— The words came out broken between sobs. "Daddy said Mum didn't go away. He did something to her." Jack and Mary exchanged alarmed looks. The suspicions the foreman had harbored for months about Ellen's disappearance seemed to be confirmed in a terrible way. "It's all right, Sophie," whispered Mary, caressing the girl's wet hair. "You can tell us everything in your own time." Gradually, between tears and pauses, Sophie related what had happened at the river. Richard's cold words, the revelation about Ellen, the attempt to get rid of his own daughter. Each word was like a stab in the hearts of the siblings, who could hardly believe in the cruelty of the man who had always been respected in the community. "He'll come after me," Sophie finally said, the fear evident in her childish voice. "He'll find me." "No, he won't," assured Jack firmly. "I won't let him get near you again." At that moment, a noise coming from the stable caught the attention of the three. Thunder was whinnying, as if wanting to be part of the conversation, reminding everyone of his presence. "Thunder," whispered Sophie, a slight smile forming on her lips for the first time since the incident. "He saved me." "Yes, he did," confirmed Jack. "I've never seen an animal act that way." It was as if he knew exactly what was happening. Mary stood up, determined. "We need to alert the authorities. Richard Smith must pay for what he did." "It's not that simple, Mary," replied Jack, still holding Sophie protectively. "Richard is a powerful man in this town. He has the police in his pocket, politicians in his hand. Our word against his isn't worth much, especially with me being just a foreman and you a teacher at the rural school." "So what do we do?" asked Mary, the frustration evident in her voice. "We need evidence," answered Jack thoughtfully. "Evidence of what he did to Ellen, evidence of his intentions with Sophie. Without that, he can simply claim it was an accident, that I kidnapped his daughter." The sound of engines approaching interrupted the conversation. Jack ran to the window, peering through the curtains. 2 local police cars were parking in front of the house, and Richard Smith was getting out of one of them, his imposing figure standing out even at a distance. "He's here," whispered Jack, turning to his sister. "And he brought the police." Fear froze Sophie in her place, her eyes wide with dread. "Don't let him take me, please," she begged, clinging to Jack's arm. Mary reacted quickly. "Take her out the back to the old barn. I'll delay them here." Jack didn't hesitate. He took Sophie in his arms and headed for the back door. "Be careful, Mary." "You too," she replied, adjusting her dress and preparing to face the unwelcome visitors. While Mary opened the front door to the police officers and Richard, whose clothes were still damp from the river, Jack ran through the yard with Sophie, safe in his arms, protected by the growing darkness of the night falling over Hope Valley. In the stable, Thunder waited, as if sensing that his presence would be needed again. Without wasting time, Jack mounted the horse, positioning Sophie in front of him. "Hold on tight, little one," he instructed, as Thunder left through the back of the stable, entering the dense vegetation that surrounded the property. Behind them, in the simple house that for a brief moment had served as refuge, Mary faced Richard Smith's cold gaze and the suspicious questions of the police officers, buying precious time for her brother and little Sophie to escape to a safe place where perhaps, just maybe, they could find the answers and evidence needed to unravel the dark secrets of the Smith family. Night was falling over the Virginia mountains when Jack, with Sophie safe in his arms, reached the small cabin hidden among the trees. It was a simple place, almost forgotten in time, that had served as a hunting post for Jack's father decades ago. Few people knew of its existence, which made it the perfect hiding place. "We've arrived," he announced, dismounting from Thunder carefully so as not to frighten the girl. "We'll be safe here for now." Sophie looked around, her large eyes absorbing every detail of the rustic cabin. The full moon illuminated the small clearing, giving the place an almost magical atmosphere, like the setting of a fairy tale, although the situation they found themselves in was far from a dream. Jack lit an oil lamp, revealing the modest interior of the cabin: a worn wooden table, 2 chairs, an old wood stove, and a simple bed, covered with a patchwork quilt. In the corner there was a small bookshelf with some dusty books. "It's not much," he said, gently placing Sophie on the bed, "but no one will find us here." The girl nodded, still in silence. The shock of what she had experienced that day had created a barrier around her, as if the world had suddenly become an incomprehensible and threatening place. Jack prepared tea with herbs he found in a ceramic pot, trying to remember the mixtures his mother made to calm nerves. While the water boiled on the wood stove, he observed Sophie, who remained motionless, looking out the small window. "Is Thunder okay?" she asked finally, her voice almost a whisper. "Yes, he's tied up outside," answered Jack, relieved to hear the girl's voice again. "He's a special horse, isn't he?" A slight smile formed on Sophie's lips. "Mom always said Thunder wasn't an ordinary horse, that he had a soul." Jack served the tea in an enameled mug and handed it to Sophie. "Your mother was a wise woman, and she was right about Thunder. Do you think he knew that my father..." The phrase hung in the air, too heavy to be completed. Jack sat on the edge of the bed. "I think animals see things that we, humans, often can't see, they feel." A comfortable silence settled between them as Sophie drank her tea. Outside, the wind whispered among the leaves of the trees, bringing the aroma of wet earth after the rain. "What will happen now?" asked the girl finally, her eyes meeting Jack's. "We're going to discover the truth," he answered firmly, "about your mother, about what your father is hiding, but for that we need evidence." Sophie frowned, thoughtful. Before she went away, she was always in the office, going through papers. Daddy would get angry when he found her. There." Jack felt his heart race. "Do you think she found something? Something your father didn't want her to see?" "I don't know," answered Sophie, "but she had a little secret box. It was hidden in the back of her closet. I saw her putting papers in there once." This information was valuable, perhaps the key to unraveling the mystery behind Ellen's disappearance and Richard's desperate actions. But returning to the Smith mansion would be extremely risky, especially now that Richard had certainly mobilized all resources to find them. Jack went to the window, observing the night outside. The decision he needed to make was difficult, but necessary. "We need those documents, Sophie, but it's dangerous to go back there." "Connie can help," suggested the girl, her eyes shining with renewed hope. "She was always Mom's friend. She'll help us." The idea had merit. Connie was loyal and had free access to the mansion. If anyone could recover Ellen's secret box without raising suspicions, it would be her. "How can I contact her without your father finding out?" asked Jack, thoughtful. Sophie smiled, a bit of her characteristic brightness returning to her eyes. "On Mondays, she goes to town to buy medicine for her grandmother. She always stops by Mr. Bennett's pharmacy at 10 o'clock. Jack couldn't help but smile at the child's astuteness. You're observant, little one. Mom always said I had eagle eyes, she replied with a touch of pride. The mention of her mother brought pain back to her face, but now there was also determination, the same determination that Ellen had always demonstrated, and that Richard had clearly underestimated. Tomorrow is Monday, said Jack, making his decision. I'll go to town to meet Connie. You'll stay here, safe. There's enough food in the pantry, and Thunder will be nearby. Sophie nodded, accepting the plan. The exhaustion of the day began to take its toll, and her eyes grew heavy. Jack adjusted the patchwork quilt over her, promising that everything would be all right. In a few minutes, the girl's breathing became regular, indicating she had finally fallen asleep. The next day, Jack left the cabin before dawn, after making sure Sophie would be safe. The girl was still sleeping when he departed, leaving a note explaining he would return soon and reinforcing that she should remain hidden. The town was buzzing with rumors when Jack arrived. Groups formed on street corners, talking in low voices, about the alleged kidnapping of Richard Smith's daughter. The official version, spread by the local police, was that Jack had abducted the child during an innocent father-daughter river outing. With his hat pulled down to hide his face, Jack circulated through the streets until he positioned himself near Mr. Bennett's pharmacy. Precisely at 10 o'clock, Connie appeared, her face marked with concern. "Connie," he called in a low voice, pulling her into a side alley. "Jack!" she exclaimed, the relief evident in her voice. "Thank God, is the girl all right?" "She's safe," he confirmed, "but we need your help." Quickly, Jack explained about the secret box mentioned by Sophie and the importance of recovering it. Connie listened attentively, her face hardening as she understood the gravity of the situation. "I always suspected," she confessed. "Ms. Ellen was agitated in the weeks before disappearing. She talked about secrets, about things she couldn't let pass. And Mr. Smith, he changed overnight." "Can you get the box?" asked Jack, the urgency clear in his voice. Connie nodded with determination. "I know exactly where to look. Ms. Ellen trusted me. She showed me once. Said that if anything happened to her, I should look there." A ray of hope emerged for Jack. Perhaps Ellen, sensing the danger she was in, had taken precautions. "When can you get it?" "Today," replied Connie. "Mr. Smith left early with the police, continuing the search. The house is practically empty." They arranged a meeting place for late afternoon, the old abandoned mill on the outskirts of town, a place rarely visited. Jack spent the rest of the day at the municipal library, trying to find information about Richard Smith's business, dealings, any clue that could indicate the origin of his financial problems mentioned by Sophie. At nightfall, Jack headed to the mill. Connie was already waiting for him, her face tense but determined, in her hands, a small carved wooden box. "I found it," she said, handing the box to Jack. "And there's more. I found this hidden with the box." She extended a sealed envelope. On the outside, written in Ellen's elegant handwriting, was the name Sophie. "A letter for the girl," explained Connie, tears in her eyes. "I think Miss Ellen knew something might happen to her." Jack held the envelope with reverence, feeling the weight of what it might contain. "Thank you, Connie. You took a great risk." "Make good use of it," she replied, "and take good care of the girl. She's special, always has been." With the box and letter safe, Jack returned to the cabin, his heart heavy with responsibility and, at the same time, light with the hope of finally discovering the truth. Sophie was at the door when he arrived, her eyes shining with joy at seeing him return safe and sound. Thunder, grazing near the cabin, whinnied softly in greeting. "I brought what we needed," announced Jack, showing the box. "And something more, a letter from your mother to you." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. With trembling hands, she took the envelope, looking at her mother's familiar handwriting. Together they entered the cabin, ready to discover the secrets the box and letter held, secrets that could forever change the fate of everyone in Hope Valley. The lamp cast dancing shadows on the rustic walls of the cabin as Sophie held the envelope with her name written in her mother's delicate handwriting. Her small fingers trembled, hesitant between the anxiety of reading Ellen's words and the fear of what they might reveal. "Would you like me to read it to you?" Jack offered gently, sitting beside the girl. Sophie shook her head. "I want to read it myself. Mom wrote it for me." Carefully, she opened the envelope and unfolded the perfumed pages, the same jasmine perfume that Ellen always wore. For a moment it was as if her mother were there, sitting beside her, and the girl's eyes filled with tears, before she even began to read. "My dearest Sophie," she began, her childish voice gaining strength with each word. "If you are reading this letter, it means my suspicions were correct and I couldn't protect you personally. First, I want you to know that you are the most important person in my life, and that everything I did was with your well-being in mind." Jack observed in silence, respecting the intimate moment between mother and daughter, even if through words written months before. "I discovered terrible things about your father," continued Sophie, reading the letter. "His business isn't what it seems. He has been using the family companies to launder money of dubious origin, involving himself with dangerous people. When I confronted Richard, he admitted being in debt to these people and wanted to use my inheritance, which is now your inheritance, to pay what he owed." Sophie paused, frowning at words she didn't completely understand. Jack moved closer, helping her with the more difficult terms, his heart heavy as he understood the gravity of the revelations. "I made a new will," the reading continued, "ensuring that everything I inherited from my parents goes to you, Sophie, and cannot be touched until you come of age. Your father was furious. We've been arguing a lot, and I fear what he might do. Therefore, I prepared this letter and organized documents that prove his illicit activities. They are all in the box that accompanies this message, along with a copy of my will and instructions on how to access the safe deposit box at the National Bank, where I kept additional evidence." The girl stopped again, looking at Jack with confusion. What does this mean? Why would Daddy do wrong things? The foreman sighed, seeking simple words to explain a complex situation. "Sometimes, Sophie, people make bad choices. Your father seems to have gotten involved with dangerous people and is now desperate." Sophie returned to the letter, determined to finish. "There is one more thing you need to know, my daughter. Thunder is not just an ordinary horse. He belonged to my family for generations, and there have always been stories about his special ability to protect those with Montgomery blood. It may seem like a legend, but I believe he senses things that we, humans, cannot perceive. Trust him. He will protect you when I no longer can." Tears now flowed freely down the girl's face. She knew Jack. Mom knew something was going to happen to her. Jack embraced Sophie, allowing her to cry on his shoulder. "Your mother was very brave and intelligent. She left everything prepared to protect you." When the girl calmed down, they turned their attention to the carved wooden box. Upon opening it, they found a series of meticulously organized documents, bank statements, contracts, photographs, and a small golden key with an engraved number. "The safe deposit box key," murmured Jack, examining it. Among the papers, one document caught his attention, the will mentioned in the letter, signed by Ellen and duly registered, naming Sophie as the sole heir to all the Montgomery fortune, with a specific clause preventing Richard from having any access to or control over the money. "This explains why your father was so desperate," commented Jack, the final piece of the puzzle fitting into place. "With you out of the way, he could probably contest the will and take control of the inheritance as your closest relative." Sophie wiped her tears, her childish face assuming a serious expression that made her look much older than her 5 years. "We need to show this to people, so everyone knows what he did." "Yes, but it won't be easy," replied Jack, thoughtful. "Your father has a lot of influence in Hope Valley. We need someone above that influence, someone he can't control." A thought occurred to him. Prosecutor Rachel Sanders. She's new to the region, transferred from the capital. She has no ties to anyone in town and has a reputation for being incorruptible. Hope was beginning to be born, but Jack knew they still faced an immense challenge. Richard Smith would move heaven and earth to find them, especially now that the incriminating documents were in their hands. "Tomorrow morning, we'll go to the neighboring town," he decided. "It's safer to look for the prosecutor there than in Hope Valley, where your father has eyes and ears everywhere." While they planned their next steps, an agitated whinny from Thunder alerted them. Jack ran to the window, cautiously peering through the gap in the improvised curtains. In the darkness of the night, Flashlights moved among the trees approaching the cabin. "They've found us," he whispered, turning to Sophie. "We need to leave here. Now." Fear shone in the girl's eyes, but there was also a surprising determination. "Thunder can take us. He knows these woods better than anyone." Jack quickly gathered the documents, putting them back in the box along with the letter. Sophie put on the coat that Connie had sent through Jack, and in a few minutes they were ready to depart. "Stay low and don't make any noise," instructed Jack, taking her in his arms. They left the cabin through the back door, plunging into the darkness of the forest. Thunder waited, as if understanding the urgency of the situation. Jack placed Sophie on the animal's back, mounting right after and holding her firmly against his chest. "Where are we going?" asked the girl in a whisper. "I know a place," replied Jack. "An old abandoned church on the other side of the river. We'll stay there until dawn, then head out to meet the prosecutor." With a light touch on Thunder's flanks, they began their silent escape through the forest. Behind them, the flashlights reached the empty cabin, and angry voices echoed in the night as they discovered their targets had escaped again. The ride through the dark forest would be frightening for any child, but Sophie, protected by Jack's arms and Thunder's reliable presence, felt strangely safe. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Trust him. He will protect you when I no longer can." And somehow, she knew Ellen wasn't referring only to the horse, but also to the man, who risked everything to keep her safe. The full moon partially illuminated the path, filtering through the treetops. Thunder moved with confidence, as if he could see in the dark, choosing almost invisible trails that took them farther and farther, away from their pursuers. "Do you think we'll make it?" asked Sophie after a long period of silence. "We will," affirmed Jack with a conviction that left no room for doubt. "Your mother left everything prepared to protect you. We won't waste the chance she gave us." In the distance, the outline of the old church began to take shape against the starry sky, offering the promise of temporary refuge. But Jack knew the real battle was yet to come, a battle not just for Sophie's safety, but for justice for Ellen and for exposing the dark secrets that Richard Smith had guarded for so long. Meanwhile, at the Smith mansion, Richard paced back and forth in his office, his face contorted with rage. On his desk, a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a phone. Beside him, a man in a dark suit waited patiently. "They have the documents," said Richard, his voice trembling with fury. "All of them. If they reach the authority—" "They won't," replied the man calmly. "My men are on their trail. It's just a matter of time." Richard served himself another shot of whiskey, drinking it in one gulp. "And when they find them?" The man didn't answer, just held Richard's gaze with a calculating coldness that dispensed with words. The message was clear. Jack and Sophie would no longer be a threat, and the documents would be recovered at any cost. The old St. Benedict's church stood solitary on top of a small hill, its stone walls worn by time telling stories of centuries past. Abandoned decades ago after the construction of a larger temple in the center of Hope Valley, it now served only as a silent marker of a forgotten era. Jack dismounted from Thunder carefully, helping Sophie down. The girl looked at the imposing construction, its windowless frames seeming like empty eyes observing the night. "Don't be afraid," whispered Jack, noticing the child's hesitation. "They built churches to be sanctuaries, places of protection. That's exactly what we need now." Thunder whinnied softly, as if agreeing. The horse seemed tireless, despite the long ride through the dense forest. Jack tied him to a nearby tree, where he could graze and rest, but still close enough should they need to leave in a hurry. The wooden church door creaked when Jack pushed it, revealing a surprisingly preserved interior. Dark wooden benches, aligned in orderly rows, covered by a thin layer of dust. On the altar, a simple crucifix still remained, illuminated by the silver moonlight entering through the high windows. "We'll stay here until dawn," explained Jack, guiding Sophie to a bench in the back, away from the windows. "Then we'll head to Valley Creek, the neighboring town, where we can find Prosecutor Rachel." Sophie nodded, her eyes scanning the church interior with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "It's beautiful here," she commented. "It seems safe." Jack smiled, impressed with the girl's resilience. Many 5-year-olds would be panicking after everything they had gone through, but Sophie demonstrated an inner strength she had certainly inherited from her mother. "Yes, it's safe," he confirmed, removing a thin blanket from his backpack that he had brought from the cabin. "Try to rest a bit. Tomorrow will be an important day." Sophie obeyed, wrapping herself in the blanket on the wooden bench. But before closing her eyes, she held Jack's hand. "Do you think Mom is okay wherever she is?" The question caught the foreman by surprise, a knot forming in his throat. How to answer a child who had just discovered that her father was probably responsible for her mother's disappearance? "Your mother was the strongest and bravest person I knew," he finally answered, choosing his words carefully. "And she loved you more than anything. Wherever she is, I'm sure she's watching over you." The answer seemed to satisfy Sophie, who closed her eyes, still holding Jack's hand like an anchor in a world that had become too unstable for a child to fully comprehend. When the girl's breathing became regular, indicating she had finally fallen asleep, Jack allowed himself to examine the documents in the box again. By the weak light of a small flashlight, he studied each paper, each photograph, each note made by Ellen's careful hand. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions. Richard Smith had been involved in complex money laundering schemes, using the family's legitimate businesses as a front. The documents showed suspicious transfers, meetings with people known for illicit activities, and detailed notes made by Ellen as she discovered the truth about her husband. Even more disturbing were the last notes, dated just 3 days before her disappearance. "R threatened again, said I was meddling with forces. Beyond my comprehension. Mentioned that accidents happen. I can no longer ignore the threats. I need to protect Sophie at all costs." Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. Those words were practically an advance confession of what Richard was planning to do. Ellen knew she was in danger and took all possible precautions to protect her daughter. A sudden noise from outside made Jack quickly turn off the flashlight. Thunder whinnied, a low alert sound. Someone was approaching. With silent movements, Jack gathered the documents, picked up Sophie, still asleep, in his arms, and moved to the church sacristy, a small lateral room that offered better protection, and an alternative exit through the back. Through a crack in the sacristy door, he observed the main entrance of the church. The door creaked again, opening slowly. A man's silhouette cut against the moonlight. It wasn't Richard, but clearly one of his men, armed and looking for traces. Jack held his breath, holding Sophie firmly against him. The girl continued sleeping, oblivious to the danger approaching. The intruder advanced down the central aisle of the church, his flashlight sweeping the benches, the altar, looking for any sign of human presence. For a terrible moment, the light beam pointed directly at the sacristy door, seeming to pierce the aged wood. Jack took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. A single sound, a single awkward movement, and they would be discovered. Outside, Thunder began to get agitated, his hooves rhythmically beating on the ground, a calculated noise that immediately attracted the intruder's attention. The man hesitated, then turned and quickly left the church, his flashlight now pointed in the direction of the horse. Jack took advantage of the distraction to move to the back door of the sacristy. He opened it carefully, revealing the old cemetery behind the church. Worn tombstones aligned in silent rows, offering multiple hiding places among the shadows. Carrying Sophie, Jack quickly crossed the cemetery, keeping low and using the tombstones as cover. Upon reaching the back wall, he heard voices approaching. The first man had apparently called for reinforcements. "They were here," said a hoarse voice. "The horse wouldn't be here if they weren't." "Spread out," ordered another voice. "They can't have gone far. The boss wants the girl and those documents before dawn." Jack felt Sophie stirring in his arms, beginning to wake up. He gently placed his hand over her mouth, whispering in her ear, "We need to be very quiet now, little one, understand?" The girl nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but understanding the gravity of the situation. Jack removed his hand, and Sophie remained silent, clinging to him with complete trust. From their hiding place, Jack could see 4 men searching the area, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like sharp knives. Thunder had disappeared, probably had broken loose during the confusion, a thought that brought both concern and relief to Jack. The horse was free, but it also meant they had lost their fastest means of transportation. "We have to go on foot from here," he whispered to Sophie. "You know that old mill at the end of the valley?" Sophie nodded again. "That's where we're going. My sister Mary should be waiting for us there. She'll help us get to the neighboring town." Hope shone in the girl's eyes. Mary, Jack's sister, was a teacher at the rural school and much loved by Sophie. Knowing she was involved in the escape plan seemed to give her new spirit. "When I count to 3, continued Jack, "we're going to run as fast and silently as we can to those trees. Ready?" Sophie hesitated, looking at her wheelchair that they had left in the church. Jack immediately understood her concern. "I'll carry you," he assured her. "Hold tight to my neck and don't let go, no matter what happens." The girl obeyed, wrapping her arms around Jack's neck, who held her firmly. 1, 2, 3. At the exact moment that Jack prepared to run, a deafening crash echoed through the night. Thunder had returned and with incredible precision galloped through the men, creating confusion and panic. Flashlights fell, shouts of surprise filled the air. "Now!" Jack took advantage of the distraction, running toward the trees while the men tried to recover from the fright caused by the horse. The forest welcomed them with its protective darkness, swallowing them among shadows and nocturnal sounds. Behind them, lights danced frantically, angry voices shouted orders, but with each step the distance increased. Safety approached. Sophie, clinging to Jack, looked back one last time, in time to see Thunder disappear in the opposite direction, as if intentionally diverting the pursuers from the true escape path. "He's helping us," she whispered with admiration. "Mom was right. He knows." Jack just nodded, saving his breath for the long walk that awaited them. The mill was at least 2 hours away on foot, and time was not on their side. They needed to get there before dawn, when daylight would make their escape much more difficult. As they advanced through the forest, Jack allowed himself a moment of hope. If they could reach Mary, if they could get to the prosecutor with the documents, perhaps just maybe they could finally bring to light Richard Smith's dark secrets and find justice for Ellen. The moon was already descending on the horizon when Jack and Sophie finally spotted the old mill. The circular stone structure, with its wooden blades motionless for decades, stood out against the sky that was beginning to lighten in the east. A thin thread of smoke discreetly escaped from the chimney, a sign that someone was inside. Mary, Jack hoped. "We've arrived," he whispered, adjusting Sophie in his arms. The girl had alternated between periods of sleep and wakefulness during the walk through the forest, demonstrating surprising endurance for a child her age. They approached, cautiously, eyes alert to any suspicious movement. The place seemed deserted except for the smoke that indicated human presence. Jack stopped at the edge of the forest, observing the mill for a few minutes before risking leaving the shelter of the trees. "Mary," he called in a low voice as he approached the door. The door opened immediately, revealing his sister's worried face. "Thank God," she exclaimed, quickly pulling them inside. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't make it." The interior of the mill had been transformed into an improvised refuge. A small fire crackled in the fireplace, driving away the cold of the early morning. In a corner there was a pile of blankets, a canteen of water, and a basket with some food. "How did you know we would come here?" asked Jack, gently placing Sophie on the blankets. "Connie warned me," answered Mary, kneeling to examine the girl. "She said Richard's men were searching the entire region, so I figured you would need a safe place before heading to Valley Creek." Jack nodded, grateful for his sister's foresight. "We need to leave as soon as it's completely dawn. Prosecutor, Rachel is our best hope now." Mary looked at the box that Jack held firmly. "Are those the documents Connie mentioned? The ones that prove Richard's crimes?" "Yes," he confirmed. "Ellen left everything organized, as if she knew what might happen. There's enough evidence here to incriminate Richard, not just for what he did to her, but also for his shady business dealings." "And Thunder?" asked Sophie, speaking for the first time since they arrived. "Will he be okay?" Mary smiled at the girl, caressing her hair. "That horse is smarter than many people, dear. He knows how to take care of himself." As if responding to the mention of his name, a distant whinny echoed from outside. Jack ran to the small window, cautiously peering through the gap in the improvised curtains. His expression changed from hope to alarm in a matter of seconds. "It's not just Thunder," he said, retreating from the window. "Richard is here with his men. They found our trail." Mary paled but maintained her composure. "There's an exit through the back, a passage that leads to the riverbank. Not everyone knows about it." "There won't be time," replied Jack rapidly, assessing the situation. "They're surrounding the mill. You need to take Sophie and the documents through the passage while I distract them here." "No," protested Sophie, clinging to the sleeve of Jack's shirt. "I won't leave you here alone." The foreman knelt before the girl, his eyes meeting hers. "Remember what your mother wrote in the letter? That she did everything to protect you? Now it's my turn to do the same. The most important thing is that you and these documents reach the prosecutor safely." Tears shone in Sophie's eyes, but she seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. With a reluctant nod, she let Mary pick her up. "Here," said Jack, handing Ellen's box to his sister. "Guard this with your life." Mary nodded solemnly. "What are you going to do?" "Buy time for you," he answered, heading to an old chest in the corner of the mill. From there he retrieved an old shotgun, the same one his father used for hunting decades ago, and find out exactly what happened to Ellen. The knocking on the door began abruptly, echoing through the interior of the mill, like thunder. "We know you're in there. Come out with your hands up and hand over the girl." Richard's voice resounded, authoritative and impatient. "Go now," urged Jack, as Mary, carrying Sophie and the box, disappeared through the narrow passage at the back of the mill. Alone, Jack took a deep breath, preparing for the confrontation. He didn't intend to use the weapon. It would serve only as an element of intimidation. His true intention was to distract Richard and his men for enough time for Mary and Sophie to reach the river, where a boat awaited them. "I'm opening," he shouted, approaching the door. "Don't shoot." Slowly he opened the door, keeping his hands visible, the shotgun hanging on his back. Richard Smith was in front, flanked by 3 men of rough appearance. The Smith patriarch seemed to have aged years in just a few days, his face marked by lines of worry and anger. "Where is my daughter?" demanded Richard, advancing into the mill, his eyes sweeping the space in search of Sophie. "In a safe place," replied Jack firmly. "Away from you." Richard laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Do you really think you can defy me, Jack? A simple foreman against the most powerful man in Hope Valley?" "A man who tried to get rid of his own daughter," retorted Jack, his voice laden with contempt, "who probably did something terrible to his own wife." The men accompanying Richard exchanged uneasy looks, as if that information was new to them. The patriarch's face contorted with fury. "Ellen didn't leave me a choice," he hissed, momentarily losing his composure. "She discovered things she shouldn't have, threatened to expose me, ruin everything I built." Jack felt his blood freeze, with the implicit admission. "So it's true, you killed her." Richard took a step back, apparently realizing he had said too much. "It doesn't matter what happened to Ellen. What matters is that Sophie is my daughter and you kidnapped her. Where are the documents you stole from my house?" "The same daughter you tried to drown in the river?" asked Jack, ignoring the question. "About the documents. The same defenseless child you would see as dispensable?" One of Richard's men, the youngest with features that had not yet been completely hardened by a criminal life, widened his eyes in shock. "Boss, what is he talking about? You said he kidnapped your daughter during an outing." "He's lying, obviously," replied Richard quickly, but there was a note of insecurity in his voice. "Ask Thunder," challenged Jack. "The horse that jumped into the river to save Sophie when her own father tried to get rid of her." As if invoked by the words, a powerful whinny echoed from outside, followed by the sound of hooves beating forcefully on the ground. Through the open door, everyone could see the majestic figure of Thunder, standing a few meters away, his posture proud and defiant. Richard visibly paled. The presence of the horse seemed to affect something deep inside him, as if the animal were a silent witness to his crimes, a relentless judge of his actions. "Enough of this charade," said one of the men, impatient. "Let's finish this and find the girl." He advanced threateningly toward Jack, who remained motionless. Before anyone could react, however, Thunder invaded the mill with a surprisingly agile movement, for an animal of his size. His eyes seemed fixed on Richard, who instinctively backed away. The momentary confusion was all Jack needed. In a quick movement, he struck the nearest man, unbalancing him. Thunder reared, his front hooves hitting the air inches from Richard, who fell backwards in panic. Taking advantage of the confusion, Jack ran for the passage at the back, following the same path that Mary and Sophie had taken minutes before. Thunder, as if understanding the plan, continued causing chaos inside the mill, keeping Richard and his men busy enough to allow the escape. While running through the narrow passage that led to the river, Jack could hear the angry shouts and powerful whinnies echoing behind him. A smile of admiration formed on his lips as he thought of the incredible animal that, once again, proved to be much more than a simple horse. Emerging on the banks of Stone River, Jack spotted Mary and Sophie already in the small boat, ready to depart. A few meters away, another larger boat was approaching. It was the ferry that made regular transport to Valley Creek, the neighboring town where Prosecutor Rachel awaited them, alerted by a discreet phone call from Connie the night before. As he ran to join them, Jack looked back one last time, in time to see Thunder leaving the mill, galloping majestically along the riverbank, as if he were escorting their escape, protecting them until the last moment. "He'll be fine," said Sophie with confidence when Jack joined them in the boat, her eyes following the figure of the horse that watched them from the shore. He always knows what to do. The boat moved away from the shore, sailing toward the ferry that would be their passage to safety. Behind them, Richard and his men finally emerged from the mill, but it was too late. The distance was already too great to reach them, and the ferry was rapidly approaching. On the shore, Richard Smith helplessly watched as his last chances, Dove covering up his crimes, disappeared downriver. His empire, built on lies and terrible actions, was beginning to crumble, and he knew it. Aboard the small boat, Sophie firmly held the box with her mother's documents against her chest, like a precious treasure. Her eyes, however, remained fixed on Thunder, who still watched them from the shore, his imposing figure diminishing as the distance increased. "Thank you, Thunder," she whispered, a solitary tear running down her face. "You kept your promise to Mum." Prosecutor Rachel Sanders' office in Valley Creek had a different atmosphere from any place in Hope Valley. The white walls, decorated with diplomas and certificates, reflected the seriousness and competence of the woman, who had built an unshakable reputation for integrity. At 40, with black hair always tied in a severe bun and penetrating eyes behind thin-framed glasses, Rachel was known for her determination to pursue justice, regardless of who was on the other side. That morning, she attentively observed each document that Mary placed on her desk, while Jack remained standing near the window, watching the street like someone expecting an attack at any moment. Sophie, seated in a chair hastily adapted for her comfort, firmly held a cup of hot chocolate, her eyes alternating between the prosecutor and the papers her mother had so carefully prepared. "This is extraordinary," murmured Rachel, adjusting her glasses while examining another bank statement. Ellen Smith documented everything with meticulous precision. There's enough evidence here not only to incriminate Richard for financial fraud and money laundering, but also— She hesitated, looking at Sophie and choosing her words carefully. "Also for Mrs. Smith's disappearance," she diplomatically completed. "And for the attempt on Sophie's life," added Jack, his voice firm. Rachel nodded gravely. "Yes, we have your testimony, and Mary's about that. With these documentary proofs supporting the narrative, even Richard Smith's power and influence won't be enough to escape justice." A light knock on the door interrupted the conversation. A young officer entered, his face showing urgency. "Mrs. Rachel," he said, "we just received confirmation. The team arrived at the Smith Ranch with the search and seizure warrant." The prosecutor smiled with satisfaction. "Excellent. And what about the other matter?" "The federal marshal is on his way. He'll personally take over the case, considering the suspect's influence in the local county." Rachel thanked with a nod, dismissing the officer. Turning to her visitors, she explained, "I requested that the federal police take over the investigation. Richard's connections in Hope Valley are too extensive to trust only the local authorities." Sophie, who had remained silent during the entire conversation, finally spoke, her voice small but determined. "What will happen to my father?" The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. It was Mary who finally answered, kneeling to be at the girl's eye level. "Your father made very serious mistakes, Sophie. He will need to answer for these mistakes before justice." "Like in the Cinderella story?" asked the girl, surprising everyone with the analogy. "When the evil stepmother is punished at the end." Mary smiled gently. "Something like that. But real life is a bit more complicated than fairy tales." "And what about my mother?" continued Sophie, her large eyes now fixed on Rachel. "Will you find her?" The prosecutor exchanged a significant look with Jack, both aware of the terrible possibility that neither wanted to discuss in front of the child. "We will do everything in our power to find out what happened to her," replied Rachel, opting for honesty without unnecessary cruelty. A new knock on the door announced the arrival of a social worker, a middle-aged woman with a gentle smile and kind eyes. "This is Dr. Clara," introduced Rachel. "She will take care of you while we resolve all the legal issues, Sophie." Before the girl could protest, Jack stepped forward. "Don't worry, little one, this isn't goodbye. It's just to ensure you're safe and well cared for during this process." Sophie looked at the foreman, then at Mary, and finally at Dr. Clara. "Thunder," she said simply. "Who will take care of him?" Jack smiled, touched by the girl's concern for the animal that had saved her life. "I will personally ensure he's well. I promise." This seemed to satisfy Sophie, who allowed the social worker to take her to an adjacent room, where snacks and some children's books had been prepared to distract her during the hours that would follow. As soon as the door closed, Rachel turned to Jack and Mary, her expression now more somber. "There's something you need to know. We received an anonymous tip last night, indicating a possible location of human remains on the Smith property." Mary covered her mouth with her hand, while Jack clenched his fists tightly. "Ellen?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "We can't confirm yet," replied Rachel carefully. "The area has been isolated and forensic experts are working at the site. If we confirm they are the remains of Ellen Smith, this will transform the investigation into a case of multiple crimes, and Richard will face even more serious charges." The hours that followed passed in a whirlwind of activities. Testimonies were collected, documents were officially registered as evidence, and a coordinated operation between federal and state police resulted in the preventive arrest of Richard Smith, found in his mansion while desperately trying to destroy more evidence. The news spread quickly through Hope Valley, causing commotion among residents who had always seen Richard as a respectable businessman and community benefactor. The stories about his involvement with money laundering, association with criminal organizations, and most shocking of all, the possibility of his involvement in Ellen's death and the attempt against his own daughter, transformed admiration into horror and indignation. 3 days after presenting the evidence to Prosecutor Rachel, the confirmation that no one wanted but all expected finally arrived. The remains found on the Smith property were identified as Ellen's. She had been buried in a remote area of the ranch near an old abandoned well. The news devastated Sophie, who even in her limited understanding as a child had maintained a small hope that her mother might one day return. It was Mary who remained, by her side during those most difficult moments, offering the comfort that only someone with true maternal love could provide. "She knew, didn't she?" asked Sophie one night, as Mary put her to bed in the temporary room of the foster home where she was staying. "Mom knew what might happen to her." Mary nodded gently, running her fingers through the girl's hair. "Your mother was very intelligent and brave. She did everything possible to protect you, setting up a plan even knowing the risks she was taking." "Like in adventure books," murmured Sophie drowsily. "She was a real heroine." "Yes," agreed Mary, containing her own tears. "A real heroine." In the weeks that followed, while the case against Richard Smith was being built and the national media began to take interest in the extraordinary story of little Sophie and the horse that had saved her, important decisions needed to be made about the girl's future. With Richard in preventive detention and facing multiple charges, Sophie's custody became a crucial issue. Ellen's will clearly indicated that, in her absence and in the impossibility of Richard exercising custody, something she had with almost prophetic vision foreseen, Sophie's guardianship should pass to her cousin, Isabella Montgomery, who lived in New York. Isabella, a successful architect of 35, arrived in Valley Creek immediately after being notified. The meeting between her and Sophie was emotional. The physical resemblance to Ellen was remarkable, and the girl immediately recognized in Isabella's eyes the same warmth and kindness that had been in her mother's. "She has the same eyes as Mom," commented Sophie to Jack after the first meeting, "and laughs the same way." The foreman smiled, relieved to see that the girl was beginning to develop a connection with her new guardian. "Your mother knew what she was doing when she chose her little one. Isabella seems to be a good person." "But will I have to leave?" "Hope Valley?" asked Sophie, the concern evident in her voice. "What about you and Mary and Thunder?" Sophie's concern with the horse had become a constant theme. Since the day they had escaped on the river, Thunder had returned to the Smith Ranch, where he was now under Connie's care, as the property had been partially isolated by the authorities during the investigation. It was Isabella who brought the solution to this particular dilemma. After several conversations with Sophie, Jack, and the lawyers responsible for Ellen's estate, she made a decision that would change the course of several lives. "I won't take Sophie to New York," she announced, during a meeting with Prosecutor Rachel and the social worker, "at least not permanently. Ellen loved this land, and Sophie has important connections here, people who protected her when she needed it most, an animal that risked its own life for her. Uprooting a child who has already gone through so much trauma from her entire familiar environment would be cruel." "What are you proposing then?" asked Rachel, intrigued. "I'll move here," replied Isabella with determination. "I can work remotely, and when I need to go to New York for in-person meetings, it will only be for short periods. I'll buy a suitable property for us, far from the Smith mansion, of course, but still in Hope Valley." The idea was met with unanimous approval, especially after consulting child psychologists who confirmed that keeping Sophie in a familiar environment, with people and places that brought her security, would be beneficial for her emotional recovery. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, 2 months after the dramatic events at the river, a small ceremony was held at the newly acquired Hope Haven, Sophie and Isabella's new home. The property, smaller than the Smith Ranch but still spacious and welcoming, included a beautiful stable where Thunder now permanently resided, an arrangement that had been facilitated by the generous reward offered by Isabella to Jack, who refused the money but accepted the position of administrator of the new property. Mary, who had developed a special bond with Sophie during those turbulent days, accepted Isabella's invitation to live in the main house and help with the girls' care, combining this role with her work as a teacher at the local school. The ceremony, simple but significant, marked not only the official move to the new residence, but also a celebration of Ellen's life and legacy. A small memorial was created in the gardens, not a place of sadness, but a serene space where Sophie could feel connected with the mother who had sacrificed everything to protect her. "Your mother would be very proud of you," said Isabella to Sophie as they watched the sunset on that special day, sitting on a swing on the porch of the new house. "You have the same strength as her." Sophie smiled, her eyes fixed on the figure of Thunder, who grazed peacefully in the nearby field. The horse, as if feeling the girl's gaze, raised his head and whinnied softly in her direction. "Mom always said Thunder was special," commented Sophie, "that he had something magical in him." "And do you believe that?" asked Isabella, curious. Sophie thought for a moment, remembering the day at the river, the strength with which Thunder had swum against the current to save her, how he always seemed to know exactly what to do at the most critical moments. "I believe," she answered finally. "Not like fairy tale magic, but a different kind of magic. The magic of love, perhaps. Mum loved him and he loved her back. And now he loves me. And I love him." Isabella hugged her niece, touched by the wisdom that this 5-year-old child demonstrated. "I think you're right, Sophie. Sometimes love is the most powerful magic there is." That night, as the new family adjusted to the routine of the new house, Richard Smith's trial continued its course, far from Sophie's eyes, now protected by people who genuinely cared about her well-being. Justice would follow its path, wounds would slowly begin to heal, and life, with its incredible capacity for renewal, would move forward. In the stable at Hope Haven, Thunder rested, his duty fulfilled, but his vigilance never really ended. The wise eyes of the animal seemed to contain stories of generations of protection and loyalty, a legacy that Ellen had understood and now Sophie was beginning to appreciate. The full moon illuminated the new property, bathing it in a silver light that transformed the ordinary into magical. In her room, decorated with fluorescent stars on the ceiling, Sophie fell asleep, embracing a portrait of her mother, her sleep now peaceful, free from the nightmares that had tormented her for so long. Hope Valley continued its peaceful existence, but something fundamental had changed. The secrets that had for so long remained buried came to light, bringing with them the possibility of healing and renewal. And at the center of this transformation was a small girl who, despite all adversities, had found strength to survive and, eventually, flourish, a living testimony to the power of maternal love and the extraordinary connection between a child, her mother, and a very special horse called Thunder.